Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Earth Day, we're celebrating this month, and today we're going to be talking about a sustainable, super organic practice that each and every one of us can participate in that we might find very enlightening as well as fun. We're going to do this because this is a particular method that's easier on the back. We'll learn to plant crops that can be grown closer together. It's water efficient and doesn't require weeding. And in a day and age where we're all uncertain about where our food comes from and whether or not it's good for us as we go after the big agribusiness people such as Monsanto, we can certainly start taking more responsibility in our very backyard or perhaps even within our very home. From the bird's eye view looking down on this particular structure we'll be talking about today, it'll look like an old-time keyhole, as it's known as keyhole gardening. The book is Plant Your Garden in a Keyhole, and I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Leon Smith. Leon, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, tell us when this whole concept of what keyhole gardening is, how it all started.
Well, it started in Lesotho, Africa, several years ago. A school needed to have more food, and the terrain there was not good for raising crops, so they developed the keyhole garden concept, in which they have a circular garden with an internal basket, and which you put leftovers in the internal basket, which help provide natural nutrients for the plant, and it worked. And eventually it became more popular here in the United States.
Now, tell us exactly what a keyhole garden is.
It is a garden. The traditional size is 6 feet in diameter, approximately 3 feet high. It can vary a little bit. Inside the circular garden that has a wedge cut out so you can access an internal basket is the basket. It's like a 1 foot wide wire type mesh cylinder that sits up about a foot higher than the garden itself. And what you do is you walk to where the wedge is and you dump in recycled materials or green materials basically that decompose, and as they do so, they help provide moisture for the garden as it leaches into the soil, and also natural nutrients, which help the crops grow.
Now, when somebody decides they want to do this, is it something that can be done indoors, or is it predominantly an outdoor project?
I've only done it outdoors. I can't conceive of it being done indoors unless you have some kind of light, that would work correctly for it. But all my gardens have been outdoors.
Now, how can we get started here? When people approach this, what do they find out or discover about keyhole gardening that they might not expect?
Well, one thing, I used to be a traditional gardener in which I would cut rows in the ground, and about every foot I'd drop a couple of seeds and cover them up and so forth. With keyhole gardening, you can plant your seeds a whole lot closer together. Usually I use like a 3-inch grid format to crowd as many seeds in as I can. And that's one plus. And part of the reason is because you're constantly providing nutrients to the soil so you can, you're feeding it better. One advantage of keyholes, of course, is conserving water. When you water out in a field, there's a lot of runoff, and you basically water a lot of weeds, which is another job, pulling weeds up. With a keyhole, you don't really have that, and you really conserve water. So those are the two big things that are advantages of keyhole gardening. You raise good crops. I've had great crops raised in mine. And my original garden was a rock and cinder block version several years ago, and I was just astounded at the great crops that were raised. I mean, they were plentiful, they were thick. It was like going into a jungle to harvest them, which I thought that was a good adventure. and I wanted another one. So my younger brother and I came up with a kit that we market that is easier to put together. I tend to procrastinate. If I have a lot of manual labor to do in building something like that, I'll put it off. But if it goes together quick and easy, then I tend to do it better.
Well, it's always good to have the incentive that something might be a little bit easier than you expect, especially when it comes to the labor side of things.
Right, exactly.
Now, is that what you're finding as people decide to go this direction, that it's a lot easier than they would have first thought?
I think so. The advantages are really great. Mainly, the difference between the traditional gardening and Keyhole is that it is a raised bed, meaning you don't have to bend over as much. You know, if you're having to go and pull weeds, and you're having to bend over and pick your beans and peas and different things all the time, it's pretty hard on the back. And with Keyhole gardening, you don't have that problem. You can just reach right over and work. And for older people, it's a pretty good thing. I'm 62, and I don't think I would ever go back to traditional gardening. One thing also interesting is during this past 5 days, we've had over 13 inches of rain here. And last year we had some big rains in April and May. And I talked to some people that had traditional gardens, and they said, well, we've got to start all over, everything washed away. But with Keyholes, you don't have that. The drainage works in a positive manner, and it's not on the ground. So there's some big advantages that way, too, to keyholing.
Now, how is it that, as you were saying earlier, that weeds that don't seem to be a problem in this?
Well, mainly, if you do end up with any weeds, they're easy to pull. I mean, they're right there on top, and you just reach over and pull them right up, and they're not that hard to pull out of the ground usually. But on the ground, I think you have, like, traveling water, things that, like when it rains, the water will travel and it'll wash things into those garden areas. It doesn't happen as much in a raised bed because you're up higher off the ground.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because you were saying one of the incentives is that this seems pretty easy for people to get involved in doing, and then they probably find themselves, because of that, being more involved in learning, gardening at a better level, don't they?
Oh, I think so. I really enjoy my keyholes. Everything we do here is experimental, just about. It's a challenge, learning how to plant your crops to where one doesn't override another too much. Also learning about trying to balance your soil somewhat. It's like every year I'll plant some corn, but also I plant beans in the same keyhole because corn absorbs a lot of nitrogen and beans tend to put it back. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. You control the soil more so than you can on the ground. And also you control your harvesting, and that's extremely important because, if you go to a grocery store and to their produce department and buy different products, a lot of times they taste a little bit bland. That's largely because they were picked really a little bit early, and they don't have any choice because they're trying to have shelf life. But in a keyhole, you can pick your crops at the peak of harvest, and that adds to the flavor. It also adds to the nutritional value, and it's just a big plus.
Very exciting. I know I'm here on your website right now, which is keyholefarm.com, and taking a look at all this, and I'm wondering, what are those white structures, those arcs that go over the top there? Are those watering structures, or?
No, I put those in this last winter to actually use as a guide to put a freeze cloth over that I fashioned into kind of a cone, and I just haven't taken them down yet. That's what those are. What I did, I got some half-inch PVC pipe. It was 10 feet long and just arched it over in about 3 different places, and then wired it in the middle, kind of hold it together. And I put the covering on top of that.
Now, is it just, I would assume you can grow more than just food in these things, right? That people actually maybe find other projects that they do?
You can raise flowers. I've had one garden that I used to raise a variety of flowers in. Of course, I've raised things like gourds, things like that. That really, I don't consider that food necessarily. I raise just about everything in them. This year I'm going pretty heavy on potatoes and tomatoes and beans. Those are my 3 biggies. Last year I spent about 3 hours a day picking green beans. I planted so many. They were mainly pintos and Great Northerns. But we had a great bean harvest last year.
Now, in your book, you outline, how this all gets set up here, and it's pretty interesting, when you start teaching people how they can begin to refeed their soil, as you were saying earlier about corn and beans. Corn does this, and then beans kind of replace that. So you're really beginning to understand the balance of how you can work with things, and it's pretty interesting how this becomes not only an organic process, but also a very good natural recycling one.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Like I said earlier, we utilize the internal basket to recycle produce, to put what we call green material in, which would be like coffee grinds, tea bags, melon cuttings, any kind of veggie cuttings, certain types of manure you can put in there. Just a big variety of things, eggshells. And what it does, it decomposes, and it actually feeds the garden. It goes through the soil, making the soil very rich. Whenever you dig around into the soil in a keyhole, it is extremely rich soil. That's been my experience. It starts out with putting cardboard on the very bottom layer, which is what I do. I wet down, I get a wheelbarrow, and I'll fill it with water and wet down the cardboard and then put it in the bottom of the garden and try to mash it in there and build it up approximately halfway or maybe a little bit more, and then start layering in twigs and dried leaves and some green leaves or some green material in there, and build it up to the top. And then I'll go in and I'll put a layer of topsoil that's mixed with compost, about 8 inches worth. I'll mash that down, and as you put it in, it falls in the nooks and crannies below. And then I'll water the garden down and leave it overnight. And the next day I go in, and it's dropped some in depth. So I add some more topsoil and compost mix, maybe a little bit of potting soil, and I plant. Now, I probably plant 90% or more of my garden with seeds, and the other with transplants. Sometimes I germinate my own seeds, prior to planting and get them started, then I'll transplant those. I learned a lot about the germinating process last year. Are you familiar with the paper towel method?
No. Please enlighten me.
Okay, what you do, you get a paper towel, just a plain paper towel, and you fold it in half. Then on half of what remains, you lay it on the table. And then with what half that remains, you'll put seeds on there. You scatter some seeds, try to separate them, and then you fold the other empty half on top of that. So you have like a square-shaped thing with seeds in the middle of it. Then you pour water on it, and it kind of soaks into the paper towel and stuff. Then you put that into a Ziploc bag, and you push the air out and seal it, and then keep it in a warm place. Well, I've been trying to do that for several years, and it would sometimes take several weeks before a plant would germinate, really, or it took a while. And last year, one of my daughters gave me a soda stream machine for Christmas. And I started using carbonated water from it to put on the paper towel to wet it down instead of tap water. And all of a sudden, like, I would put green bean, black-eyed pea seeds in there, and they would germinate within 24 hours. And the bean seeds would take about 36 hours. And I did this time after time just to make sure it wasn't an oddity. And all types of seeds did that. So I got to doing some research about carbonated water and learned that plants really crave carbon. And it usually enhances their growth and so forth to use that. So that's what I've been doing. I've been using carbonated water on these, and they germinate quick. And you can take the seeds out then and put them in a little container with some, some dirt in it or some potting soil, and start growing them indoors even, and then you can transplant them into keyholes. And that works well.
Now, it's pretty interesting because, as you were saying, there's so much that you can learn, and this is also a great thing that you can involve your children in, and because it's very magical and very tangible, and it starts bringing other benefits, I'm sure, to your yard that maybe sometimes people don't expect, like different kinds of animals starting to come around.
Yeah, we have various animals that come around. One thing I really enjoy a lot are some of the insects, like watching the butterflies out there, learning some of the patterns of the birds, the patterns of the bees. Like early in the morning, the bees show up and do their bit, and then later in the day, we have our wasps and yellow jackets. And they kind of have their own time that they do their thing. But also involving children is extremely important, I think. We recently had some Girl Scouts try to, as part of their Feed the World program, they wanted to do some keyholing. So I had them plant some of the seeds, in fact, plant a lot of seeds. And at first, they were a little bit skeptical of getting their hands in the dirt and dealing with the bugs and all that kind of stuff. But by the end of the day, they were picking up bugs and worms and things, and they were just having a great time. And they were telling me what to plant where. It's like they were old farmers almost. And it was interesting. A couple of weeks later, some of them came back by, and we had plants coming up. And they were pointing at them saying, I planted that one, I planted that one, I planted that one. So, it's really an exciting thing to do and to teach. And I think it's important, if we're going to sustain our earth, that young people learn this kind of thing. Used to there were family farms, and they had a pretty good feel for it. But nowadays, that's kind of gone by the wayside. But it still is very important, and they can learn things that they can, come up with new ideas on how to do things in growing crops. And I can see the future looking very bright if we can get young people involved in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's pretty amazing when you consider the potential of something like this because, like you said, it gets people hands-on, it gets them thinking, gets them learning, and the exciting thing about a process like that is as you have successes, you tend to want to do more of it, and as a result, you're going to get a lot more that you sow, so to speak. And as you were saying, there seems to be a movement about feed the world, and it's interesting when it comes to doing this because this is something that kind of reproduces itself over and over and over again. It's like it repays you back in spades. It's incredible.
Yeah, I consider keyholes is perhaps the perfect gardening system because of the shape of them, the round shape, and the way you're actually, doing the recycling with. It's just the perfect system, and the crops are great that you raise, and it's pretty easy to do. And but I enjoy just being outside and watching what goes on. Every day I go outside, I can see plant growth, and that's exciting too. Knowing, hey, that plant grew some more, or the whole garden did. You can see it, and just knowing that you actually planted the seeds and you made it happen. And the food is delicious. We've been filling our freezer with beans and peas and okra and you name it for several years now. And we've had other people come in and pick some too. You know, we have more than we can freeze ourselves. And so I just love Keyhole gardening. I recommend it to anybody.
Now, I understand that in 2014 you had the French government purchase some kits from you. Tell us about what was going on there.
Well, I got an email from somebody in Paris who is an architect, and she was inquired about the possibility of obtaining a couple of our kits that we sell. And so I quoted her a price, and I said, of course, it's going to cost more to ship than it costs to buy the product, you know, that far. And we talked about it a little bit, and I inquired as to why she wanted it, and she said, well, that they were having a Heritage Days in Europe, and that they wanted to utilize these as part of that, you know, getting back to nature. As it ended up, she was kind of representing the French government. It was the French government that bought the kits, and they bought 5. And they set them up, and they had people touring, and we ran some pictures in the paper, on our website about it. And it was just really exciting, and they said it was a great success. They loved doing it. So
I'm taking that this whole thing is just really beginning to take off, and people are just becoming very more inspired about getting involved in something like this.
I think so. I've been trying to educate people as to the fact that Keyhole gardens do exist. Down here in Texas, of course, we have, a group of people called Master Gardeners. And I've been to several of their programs, and they're all sold on Keyhole gardening. They love them. We've sold quite a few kits to school districts, and some have bought more each year. In fact, a lot of our customers, you know, buy one year and maybe buy 2 or 3 the next year because they like them. And they can see things that they could grow if they had more space or more keyholes to do it with. But what we're trying to promote is backyard farms. You know, anybody can just about, if they have a backyard, they can have a keyhole garden back there and raise some crops. Rather than just mowing a lawn, they can actually do something with it, productive. And we think that's kind of important. We've also been talking about perhaps at some point trying to provide some of our kits to maybe some third world countries to experiment with, to see if they can raise some of their own crops this way. What I'm thinking about is, instead of just giving them a bowl of rice and a bunch of drugs, let's go over there and show them how they can actually raise their own food on a continuing basis. That would be a lot smarter, I think. But we haven't been able to work anything out yet. But we've been talking about that some.
You know, I was just thinking as we were talking about the children and, you know, being able to pass on this skill to them where they can learn it for themselves. Some time ago, I was doing an interesting segment of interviews, and through this series of books, there were books that were actually recommended as source material to kind of look into things a little further, and one of them was called The Secret Lives of Plants. And what was interesting about this whole thing was, you know, that the story was actually based about a mysterious girl that lives in the taiga up in Russia. And so they were talking about how, you know, the Russian people out there, they pretty much all have gardens. So there's not only enough food for them, there's enough food to share with a lot of other people as well. What I found intriguing was how plants, we symbiotically live with them here on Earth, and they, you know, can be very intuitive, so to speak. And it was interesting because they were sharing how one of the things that you do is you go out to your garden each day and you'll actually wash your feet off or rinse them off with water into the garden. And what the plants then do is they pick up these energy signatures from this water, and they kind of attune themselves to your particular body chemistry, so they adjust themselves so that as you ingest them, they actually keep you in good health. And I thought, that's really interesting to think about that. But the fact is I'm sure as a gardener, plants can probably become very intuitive in your experience. Would that be true?
I think so. I know I talk to my plants. I know it sounds crazy, but I'll talk to them when I'm out there a little bit. And I try to touch them somewhat, of course you do that when you're picking crops anyway, but it's just being around them. I think that there's a plus. It may not have, maybe be all in my mind, but maybe it's not. But it's just an enjoyable experience, just to be trying to communicate with nature. And I really think that we're missing out on that a lot these days. I think that it's just, I'd rather have a youngster get involved in keyhole gardening instead of getting involved in iPads and stuff like that, if you know what I mean.
I do. It seems like so technology is distracting and cutting them off from the real world.
Yeah, they sit there, spend their time texting and all this kind of stuff, and they could be out actually doing something important like working in a garden.
Exactly. Well, and what I like about this is that you're like many people out there who are trying to solve problems by not complaining about, let's say, what the big corporations are doing. You just simply say, look, I choose not to buy into that. I choose to go this direction instead. There's not a whole heck of a lot anybody can really do about that.
But there's really not. Of course, you always, like you said at the beginning, you worry about people like Monsanto. I say people, it's a company. But, and their intrusion into the natural way things should be happening, with all their GMOs and all that. It's really almost scary. But that's a big concern of mine also. I try to graze heritage type crops, plant those types of seeds that have been around for generations. I think that's good. But yeah, I'm pretty concerned about where we're headed, and I would like to at least do my bit to keep us on track with the natural way things happen, and keeping Mother Nature to where she's happy. She can be a terror sometimes with the weather, but still, that's another story, I guess. But I really do love keyhole gardening. I wouldn't garden any other way.
Well, I can certainly see why, too. Leon, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. And for our listeners, if you could give out your website again so they can find out more about this and how to perhaps even purchase keyhole kits, please give them that information.
Okay, it's www.keyholefarm.com. And I do have a book called Plant Your Garden in a Keyhole. And I also published a Spanish version of the book, in case anyone is interested, called Planta su Jardín en el Ojo de la Carretera. It's a transcription of the Plant Your Garden in a Keyhole book. But I really encourage people to visit our site if they want to and get involved in keyhole gardening.
There you go. Well, Leon, thank you again for being here on the program with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You betcha. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. I encourage you to sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well to stay updated on what we've got coming up on upcoming programs. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.